Marcus Webb makes $118,000 a year. Renee Ortiz makes $52,000. Last Tuesday night, they both went to bed with the same amount in their checking account, $340. Marcus is a project manager in Denver. Renee works the front desk at a dental office outside Toledo. On paper, Marcus is doing more than twice as well. In real life, on a random Tuesday in the middle of the month, they were both staring at the same 3 digits on a screen, doing the same quiet math. Can this get me to Friday? And what happens if it can't? If you've ever felt that gap between what your paycheck says and what your life actually feels like, stick around. Because the reason behind it isn't what most people assume. And once you see it, you'll start noticing it everywhere, not just in your bank account, but in how you make decisions, what stresses you out, and why some people seem so much calmer about money than their salary would explain. Marcus didn't grow up around money. His parents rented a 2-bedroom outside Cleveland, and when he got his first real job offer at $26,061 a year, it felt like he'd made it. 5 years, 2 promotions, and 1 job change later, he's at $118. He moved into a 1-bedroom downtown with floor-to-ceiling windows. He leases a car he genuinely likes driving. There's a gym membership he uses about twice a month, a streaming bundle he barely watches half of, and a coffee subscription that shows up every 3 weeks whether he's home or not. None of it feels excessive. Each piece, on its own, feels like something he earned. That's part of what makes this so easy to miss. On the 10th of the month, after rent, after the car payment, after insurance, after the minimum on 2 credit cards he opened a couple years ago just for emergencies, Marcus has $340 to get through the next 20 days. Groceries, gas, whatever comes up. Something almost always comes up. 2 Saturdays ago, his car needed new brakes. $420. He put it on the card with the higher limit. Told himself he'd knock it out with his next paycheck. And by the time that paycheck landed, it had already been claimed by everything else. The $420 just stayed there, quietly, waiting for a month that never quite arrives. Marcus doesn't think of himself as someone with a money problem. He thinks of himself as someone who hasn't gotten that next promotion yet. One more step up, he figures, and this feeling finally goes away. Across the country that same week, Renee was dealing with something almost identical. Even though her bank account showed a nearly identical balance to his, Renee makes $52,000. She splits a 2-bedroom apartment with her sister, drives a 2014 Corolla with 211,000 miles on it. And her version of a treat is grabbing bubble tea on the way home after a long shift. When her car started making a grinding sound that same week, she didn't reach for a credit card. She opened an account on her phone labeled car stuff. $310 in it, built up $4, $17, and sometimes $40 at a time over the past year. The mechanic's quote came back at $280. She paid it. The balance dropped to $30. Life went on. Same week, same kind of problem. 2 completely different experiences of it. Here's what's strange about that. If you lined up their paychecks side by side, Marcus earns more than double what Renee does. If you asked 100 people which one is in better financial shape, almost all of them would say Marcus without a second thought. And for that week at least, almost all of them would be wrong. Because the number that actually predicts how someone experiences money isn't their income, it's the space between what comes in and what goes out, what's actually left over every month, regardless of how big the paycheck is to begin with. Before that break job, Marcus's space was about $34 a month, once you counted everything honestly. Renee's was closer to $200. On paper, he earned $66,000 more per year than she does. In the part of life that decides whether a surprise expense is a minor errand or a 5 alarm fire, she was the one ahead. This isn't random, and it isn't really about willpower, even though it's constantly blamed on it. There's a pattern underneath it, and once you know what it looks like, you start seeing it everywhere. When someone's income goes up, their spending tends to climb right alongside it. Not all at once, and not in one obvious move. In small additions, each of which feels completely reasonable on its own. A slightly nicer apartment when the lease comes up. A car that doesn't make that sound the old one did. A subscription here. A delivery order there. Because it's been a long week and you've earned it. None of those choices are the problem by themselves. The problem is what happens to the gap underneath them. If your income grows by $800 a month and your spending quietly grows by $750, you're technically making more money and you feel almost exactly as squeezed as before. There's a name for this pattern. Lifestyle creep. It doesn't crash into your finances. It just quietly carries them somewhere else, a little at a time, until you look up and realize you're nowhere near where you thought you'd be. Marcus never made one decision that wrecked his finances. He made about a dozen small ones over 5 years, each reasonable in the moment. And each one took a slice of the raise that was supposed to make things easier. By the time he was earning almost twice what he started with, he had almost nothing left over, because his life had grown to match it, dollar for dollar. If you'd shown 26-year-old Marcus his current paycheck, he would have assumed he was set for life. Instead, he's the same person, with the same $340, just with a nicer view. Here's the part that tends to surprise people the most. You'd think this pattern would mostly affect people who don't know much about money, but that's not what shows up in real life. Plenty of people who go through this know, intellectually, exactly what they should be doing. They've read the articles. They know what a budget is. They could explain compound interest if you ask them. And they still end up here making more, saving roughly the same as they did years earlier on a smaller income. That's because knowing what to do and actually doing it pull from completely different parts of how we operate. There's a concept in behavioral economics called present bias. In simple terms, your brain values an immediate reward far more than a future one, even when the future reward is objectively bigger. $1 spent today on something that feels good right now feels more real, more rewarding than $1 saved for a future that hasn't happened yet. This isn't a character flaw. It's how human brains are wired, and it evolved for good reason for most of human history. Prioritizing today made sense for survival. The problem is that this wiring doesn't update well for a world of recurring subscriptions, easy credit, and one-click purchases. So when Marcus got that first raise, his brain didn't experience it as an increase in future security. It experienced it as, I now have access to things that used to feel out of reach. And the things that feel out of reach are exactly the things that, once accessible, feel the most rewarding to have finally. That reward feeling is real. It's just temporary. And it resets almost immediately, which means the next small upgrade starts to feel necessary too. There's a second layer underneath this called recalibration. When Marcus was making $42,000, a $1,400 apartment would have felt almost irresponsible. Once he was making over $100,000, that same apartment started to feel modest compared to what his coworkers were paying. His sense of what counted as normal spending had quietly recalibrated to match his new income, almost in real time. And once something feels normal, it stops feeling like a choice. It just feels like life. This is the trap. Not ignorance, not bad decisions. Recalibration, Your sense of what's reasonable adjusts to match what's available, often faster than your savings account can keep up. There's a second piece that doesn't show up on any budget spreadsheet, and it might matter even more. When people are constantly close to zero, their thinking changes. Not because they're careless, because money stress eats up mental bandwidth the same way a phone running 50 apps at once eats up battery. You start making decisions for the next 10 days instead of the next 10 years. The next bill becomes the whole horizon. Bigger questions: should I switch jobs? Should I negotiate this? Is this worth keeping? Get pushed aside. Because there's no room left to think about them properly. Renee noticed the difference in herself. When her car made that grinding noise, her first thought was, I'll check the car stuff account and figure out the rest tonight. It barely registered as stressful. A few months earlier, before that account existed, the same noise would have sent her into the same spiral Marcus knows well, running through which bill could wait, which card had room, what would happen if it didn't get fixed before her next shift. The car made the same noise both times. The only thing that changed was whether her brain had to treat it as an emergency or a line item. There's one decision in Marcus's life that did more to create this situation than everything else combined, and he barely registered it as a decision at all. When his lease came up 2 years ago, he looked at 2 apartments. One was a 1-bedroom downtown for $1,900 a month. The windows, the location, the version of his life that matched the job title on his profile. The other was a similar 1-bedroom about 20 minutes further out for $1,300. He picked the first one. $600 a month difference. $7,200 a year. Almost exactly the size of the gap he keeps wondering about every time he opens his banking app on the 10th of the month. Housing doesn't just cost what it costs on the lease. It sets the baseline that everything else gets measured against parking, insurance, the convenience purchases that come with living somewhere busy, even the furniture that seems to fit the place. One choice, made in about 20 minutes while comparing 2 listings on his phone, quietly set the ceiling on how much breathing room Marcus would have for the next several years. Over the 2 years he's lived there, that $600 monthly difference adds up to $14,400. More than 3 times what it would have taken to wipe out that break job balance and still have money left over. Most people spend more time comparing grocery prices than evaluating the financial multiplier effect of where they live. Get housing right, and everything else becomes easier. Get it wrong, and every other goal becomes harder, not dramatically, not all at once, just steadily, month after month, for as long as the lease lasts. So if the problem isn't income, and it isn't really knowledge either what actually works, the first shift is making the gap visible. Most people who experience lifestyle creep have never actually seen in concrete numbers how their spending has shifted over time. They feel like they're spending about the same as always, because each increase felt small when it happened. But about the same compared to what? When Marcus actually did this, pulling up bank statements and adding things up by category, the number that hit him hardest wasn't the rent increase or the car payment. It was the subscriptions. 11 of them. Streaming services, a meal kit he'd used twice in 6 months, a fitness app for a gym he'd stopped attending, a cloud storage upgrade he didn't remember choosing. Individually, none were more than $15 a month. Together, $94 a month, over $1,000 a year, for things he genuinely couldn't tell you he was using. That number wasn't going to fix his finances on its own, but it broke the spell. It made the invisible visible. And once something is visible, it becomes a choice again, instead of just background noise. The second shift is to design around present bias rather than fight it. Since the brain is wired to overvalue immediate rewards, the move isn't to white knuckle your way through willpower every day that tends to work for a few weeks and then collapse. The move is to make the future focused choice automatic, so it happens before the present bias brain even gets a vote. This is the logic behind automatic transfers. If money moves toward savings the moment it arrives, before it sits in a checking account looking spendable, the decision gets made once instead of every single day. The third shift is creating a buffer between earning more and spending more. Not eliminating lifestyle improvements that's not realistic and not really the point. The point is the delay. When income goes up, the instinct is to spend more to match it, often within the same month. A simple alternative is to let any income increase sit unspent for a defined period long enough for the new normal recalibration to settle before decisions are made about it. The gap between I got a raise, so naturally my spending adjusts immediately. I got a raise, and for now my spending stays exactly where it was, is the entire gap between Marcus's last 3 years and a version of those 3 years where he'd have an extra $25,000 sitting somewhere right now. Renee started with $31 a month, 3 forgotten subscriptions canceled on a Saturday afternoon, automated into an account she never opened on a normal day. Over 8 months, with a little extra added when she could, it became close to $250, enough to turn a car repair from a crisis into an errand. She's since started a second account, smaller and slower, labeled just in case for the kind of expense that has nothing to do with the car at all. Marcus is 6 weeks in. He canceled 7 of those 11 subscriptions. He set up an automatic transfer the day his paycheck hits. $67, the same amount he used to lose to subscriptions he never used. And the last time he got a small raise, he didn't do anything with it for 2 months. Just let it sit. Let the new number become normal before deciding what to do with the difference. It's not dramatic. There's no single moment where everything clicked. But for the first time in 5 years, the gap between what he earns and what he owes is actually closing slowly, but in the right direction. Here's the one thing worth doing tonight. Open your bank account and review your recurring charges one by one. Find something you haven't used in the last 30 days. Cancel it. Then set up an automatic transfer for that exact amount. Time to land the same day your paycheck does into a separate account. Name it something specific, car stuff, just in case, whatever makes it feel real to you. Not savings, because savings feels like something you eventually spend, something that feels like a floor you're building underneath yourself. That's what Renee did with $31. That's what Marcus is doing now with 67. Neither number seems to change anything. Over 8 months, one of them turned a car repair from a crisis into an errand. The other one is just getting started, but for the first time in 5 years, his gap is wider than it was last month, not narrower. Wider is how it begins. If this video helped you see your numbers differently, subscribe every week. I break down the patterns most people don't notice until they're already stuck inside them. I always leave you with one thing you can actually do today. See you in the next one.